The To Africa subsea internet cable is the largest ever built. 45,000 kilometres long, it stretches all the way around the continent. It promises to bring a huge boost in internet capacity and resilience to billions of people in Africa and beyond. In Calais, France, a team is preparing to set sail to lay the next section of the line. And this is what To Africa and all subsea internet cables look like. About the same width as a garden hose, and inside, protected by that plastic coating, there's all these really thin optical fibres, and it's on these that your emails and social media posts travel under the oceans around the world at the speed of light. It's subsea cables like these that have helped the world get connected in recent years. 70% of us are now online. But it's expensive and high-stakes stuff. One break of the cable or tangle of the wires can cost millions to repair. Once they're installed, a lot can go wrong too. In March, internet connectivity to 13 African countries was badly disrupted after lines were severed by a suspected giant underwater landslide. Breakages are common, but thanks to a sophisticated system of rerouting, most of the time we don't really notice. However, the bigger threat to internet connectivity comes from governments themselves. Organisations like Top 10 VPN track deliberate internet shutdowns. Last year, researchers say was the worst on record, with countries, particularly India, routinely switching off connectivity for everything from preventing cheating in exams to stifling unrest.
Internet shutdowns, it's like this blanket censorship. You are controlling and stopping information flows for an entire population or community, which in some contexts, like this, in situations of armed conflict or war, it can be fatal. You know, there are all sorts of economic, social, civil and political rights that are severely impacted.
Lives online are also being controlled in a less obvious way. This map is Freedom House's latest index of freedom online. The redder countries are less free, and the bluer ones are most free, based on censorship, surveillance, and how many websites are blocked. Recently, Iran and Myanmar have declined the most, with China remaining the worst online environment, according to researchers. Globally, they say internet freedom has declined 13 years in a row. Experts say the trend is only going in one direction because tools for internet control have become abundant and governments are far less squeamish about using them.
The idea that the internet is a global space that is a commons, that is, or, it's public good or commons or some combination that's going to be beyond the reach of governments to control, it's going to be the same everywhere. That was always a bit of a fantasy, but it also was sort of this knee-jerk libertarianism that was based on an incorrect understanding of how the technology actually works.
Geopolitics, too, is threatening the status quo in unlikely places. The US, one of the champions of the open internet, is taking the unprecedented move of banning one of the world's most popular apps, TikTok, due to security fears about the Chinese-owned company. So even as incredible feats of engineering are helping to connect us, the internet is more splintered and fractured than ever before.
Now, cast your mind back to 1996, if you can. Do you remember the buzz that there was around the fact that scientists had created Dolly the sheep, the world's first mammal cloned from an adult cell?
Nearly 3 decades on, and cloning technology has come a long way. In some countries, you can even clone your pet, as Stephanie Hegarty tells us.
500 million people around the world have a dog or a cat at home. I'm one of them, and this is my dog, Zeus.
And anyone who has a pet understands the special bond that we have with them. They're part of the family. But we know that sooner or later we're going to have to say goodbye to them. They don't live as long as we do. But what if you didn't have to?
What if you could clone your pet?
It was back in 1996 that we learned that scientists in the UK had cloned the first mammal from an adult cell, Dolly the sheep. And people were shocked and stunned. It was like something from a sci-fi film.
But in the past 20 years, this technology has moved on so much it's become accessible, although the costs are high, about $50,000. People can now clone animals from livestock to show horses, race horses, and even cats and dogs.
It's now possible, from just a small tissue sample, to clone a dog like Zeus.
Austin, Texas is home to one of America's largest cell storage facilities for pet cloning. It's also the home of a young pet owner whose beloved cat Chai died 7 years ago.
This is Belle, and my name is Kelly, and I cloned my cat. A lot of people think that I wanted to bring my cat back from the dead, but that really was not the case at all. I just wanted to carry on a piece of my cat. I am not rich by any...
Human twins, they can look different. It all depends on how they develop in the womb. Even their fur pattern can be different.
Their temperament is the exact same, so they're both bold, sassy, bossy, cats with attitude, but their markings are actually different. I really wanted to be careful in the fact that I treated Belle as an individual and not as just a copy of my other cat.
Cloning for non-scientific purposes is banned in the UK and in the EU. There have been concerns about the health of cloned animals. But the first essential step of cloning an animal, tissue cultivation and storage, is allowed here.
Samples for genetic preservation and cloning are mainly taken in the UK and Europe after the animal has passed away. And the first process we do once the samples arrive with us is we preserve the DNA to store it indefinitely for the owner so that they can bring those skin samples back to life when they want to think about cloning. To clone an animal, all we actually need is one of these little piles of skin here. I'll place one of these piles of skin into each of these vials. They contain our special freezing media, which is really key to this process of being able to freeze the samples down to -196 and retain the integrity of the DNA to be able to create living cells from them in the future. The second stage is the cell culture, and that's where we try and replicate the individual cells that make up the skin sample, so the client has cultured cells ready to move on to the stage of cloning. When the owner's ready to clone.
But it's banned in a lot of countries, and cloning today mostly happens in the US, China, and South Korea.
The first step of cloning is enucleation. So what you would do is you would take eggs from some females, and you would denucleate the eggs, turn them into a blank egg. The second step in cloning is reconstruction. You would take one cell from the animal you want to clone and insert it right into that blank egg. The third step is fusion and activation. That kind of mimics what an egg and sperm would do, that day 0 embryo. Once that's done, the eggs get transferred into our surrogates, and the surrogate will have the babies naturally. Clones are very similar to the original animal, but there are some epigenetic factors, for example, environment, what they eat, what experiences this new clone is going to have, that could make it a little different than the original.
How these technologies can be used for obviously conservation, and the way that we can freeze cells down in order to be able to bring them back to life in 10, 20 or 1,000 years time quite often comes back to these very same technology. If you preserve these genetics and you can clone some of these species back, you can actually help a species that could be on the brink of extinction and hopefully stop that particular species from disappearing.
It's been 28 years since Dolly the sheep was born, and animal cloning is still controversial. Even now, the success rate of a cloned embryo is relatively low, which raises ethical concerns about the well-being of donors and surrogates, as complications during the cloning process can cause pain and suffering to the animals involved.
So would I clone Zeus? I mean, the idea of having to say goodbye to him one day is heartbreaking, but realistically, could there ever be another Zeus?
That was Stephanie, and that raises so many questions. We'll see you soon.
Bye.
And there's more.